Hello everyone, welcome back. I'm Dr. Larry Malerba, and this is episode number 4 of Rethinking Science, the podcast that provides critical commentary on issues of the day regarding science and medicine and defends citizens' rights to make informed choices for themselves. In the last episode, I demonstrated how the basic assumptions made by science regarding its own methodology and regarding the true nature of the world that it investigates cannot be proven by science. Questions about the presuppositions made by science, therefore, are better left to philosophers. Philosophy of science is a popular academic discipline, one that is often coupled with the history of science. Two broad categories that should be of particular importance to philosophers of science are ontology and epistemology. Ontology is a branch of metaphysics that concerns itself with the nature of reality and the nature of existence. Remember how science and medicine both assume that the subject matter they investigate is strictly material. Any belief to the contrary is carefully excluded from circles of serious scientific influence. Epistemology is the philosophy of knowledge. It concerns itself with how it is that we know things and with the limits of human knowledge. Recall again how science assumes that its methods of obtaining knowledge are objective and therefore superior to other more subjective sources of knowledge. Now, philosophy of science, in my opinion, is not particularly adventurous. It tends to acquiesce, not wanting to ruffle the feathers of the most influential academic disciplines of our time, those of the hard sciences. As a consequence, it is reluctant to challenge the presuppositions of the scientific worldview. Instead, it contents itself with examining questions that fall within the existing bounds of science. Take ethics, for example. Ethics accepts the presuppositional parameters established by science and medicine as givens. It only examines choices made and actions taken by scientific practitioners within the scope of those parameters. It rarely questions the dominant scientific paradigm itself, in spite of the fact that, according to some measures, medical error is the third leading cause of death in the United States, second only to heart disease and cancer. One would think that ethicists would be concerned about such an abysmal track record and would feel compelled to investigate some of the foundational principles upon which Western medicine rests. Sadly, this is rarely the case. Most of us have spent lifetimes living in societies that revere science and medicine. As a consequence, we're continually spoon-fed talking points about the tremendous successes achieved by science. Now, I don't dispute those achievements. It bears repeating that I am a lover of science myself, but that doesn't render science or medicine immune from questioning, criticism, or even fault. Unfortunately, we're not going to find this kind of critical perspective where we should find it, within the halls of academia, in philosophy and ethics departments. So here, in today's episode, I will identify some of these questionable scientific assumptions and discuss each one briefly. Let's take some of the isms of science and medicine one by one. Remember, these isms are scientifically unverifiable consensus beliefs that are taken for granted by the scientific community to be so obviously true that no one questions them. So let's begin at the beginning with scientific materialism. Now, I won't belabor this particular ism since we've talked about it previously. Suffice it to say that if science in general and medical science in particular are to be accurate and effective, then they can't continue to ignore the relevance of the immaterial to human health, which is to say that they can't ignore consciousness, the human mind, the psyche, spirit, soul, and subjective experience itself. There's much more to human health than just lab values and diagnostic findings. The concept of psychosomatic illness, for example, is common knowledge even to the average layperson, and yet it receives little attention from a medical establishment whose prime directive sends the clear message to its practitioners that it is unscientific and unprofessional to take such things too seriously. Now, periodically, I'll use my own medical specialty as a contrasting example. In homeopathy, psychosomatic relationships are taken for granted. In fact, they frequently determine the course of treatment. A person with anger issues and migraines may receive one treatment, while another person with migraines who's suffering from grief may be given a different treatment. In light of information like this, it becomes apparent that scientific materialism is a gross oversimplification of the true nature of human illness. The conventional medical model assumes migraine headaches to be strictly physical and expects that they will respond favorably to biochemical, i.e., pharmaceutical interventions. And yet there are many migraine sufferers who fail to get relief from their prescription drugs. Another prominent ism of science and medicine is reductionism. Reductionism is, in essence, a form of tunnel vision, one that enables science to pursue its divide and conquer strategy. Reductionism suggests that breaking down the various phenomena encountered in nature into their constituent parts will inevitably lead to a thorough understanding and even mastery of the whole. It seeks to reduce complex phenomena down to just a few key factors. Two clear examples of medicine's reductionist imperative are represented by the fields of immunology and genetics. Tremendous financial resources and intellectual capital are poured into these fields because it's the collective belief of the scientific community that the keys to health and the secrets to conquering disease will someday be found in these tiny microscopic germs and genes.
We must master the power of the universe.
In my opinion, in both cases, the return on investment has been woefully inadequate. The problem is that no one ever makes a genuine effort to put the pieces back together again. I suspect that this is the case because no one really wants to face the implications of reductionism's failed strategy. As a consequence, the entire medical enterprise has been splintered into a dizzying array of body parts, academic departments, medical specialties, and subspecialties. Now, I don't deny the value of the various medical specialties, but the medical world has become so fragmented that it creates just as many problems as it solves. Well-qualified primary care and family doctors capable of seeing the big picture are a dying breed. Sadly, this absence of generalists capable of synthesizing the growing mountain of medical information creates a serious blind spot, one that has a profound impact on actual patient outcomes. A reductionist perspective is like wearing blinders. It makes it easy to focus on a few specific local factors without worrying about how one's theories and actions affect the other parts of the system. It allows me as a physician to prescribe an antibiotic in order to kill a germ without concerning myself over how it affects the microbial ecosystem, or whether it encourages the development of stronger germs, or whether it renders the patient susceptible to additional illness further down the road. Pharmaceutical research trials are another good example of how reductionism has infected medical science. Widely thought of as the highest gold standard of evidence, randomized controlled trials, or RCTs, are nothing more than an exercise in reductionistic tunnel vision, whereby a few conveniently chosen factors are tracked and studied to the exclusion of all other factors. They're designed by drug companies for drug companies in order to be able to obtain FDA approval. Such trials tend to focus on short-term outcomes regarding specific targeted symptoms, as opposed to other more important longer-term measures of recovery, health, and well-being. RCTs tend to minimize most short-term side effects, and they often completely ignore long-term side effects and dangers. Without these blinders, without this industry-wide reductionist standard that allows everyone to ignore these important factors, virtually no drug would ever meet the already low bar of FDA approval. The idea that such research trials represent the highest standard of evidence makes sense only if you naively subscribe to the isms of conventional science and medicine. Of course, when we take a broader view, we come to realize that reductionism is the exact opposite of holism, because holism, by definition, strives at all times to connect the dots in order to understand the whole. Without a doubt, a medical system that genuinely valued both reductionism and holism would be a more complete and effective medical system. Okay, so now two additional unexamined presuppositions or isms of science and medicine are rationalism and empiricism. Science claims to embody both, but I would like to pose the question, is that really true? The funny thing is that while most definitions of science tend to include the word empirical, it's my contention that modern medical science has essentially abandoned empiricism in favor of rationalism. So what do I mean by that? I mean that in order to preserve the integrity of its rationally constructed theories, medicine is often forced to disregard the empirical data. A simple example of this is that in order to continue believing in the safety of vaccines, medicine has had to ignore, deny, or rationalize away the many warning signs that point to some very real safety issues. The skyrocketing numbers of adverse events, i.e., the empirical evidence, are either outright denied or minimized by explaining them away as the risks that come with the benefits. This convenient but disingenuous rationalization serves to preserve the cherished medical belief in the general safety of vaccines. Now, science wears its rational label as a badge of honor. It literally thinks of itself as rational science. In other words, it places great emphasis on the integrity of its own logical conclusions, even when those conclusions are challenged by growing empirical evidence to the contrary. A great deal of modern medicine is predicated upon a number of similar rationally constructed premises, like the increasingly ludicrous notion that the microbial world is an existential threat that can only be conquered by waging war against it. Medicine's stubborn pride in its rationalist beliefs renders it unable to adjust to new empirical information. There's a fascinating bit of history that sheds some light on our current perplexing state of medical affairs. There happens to have been an ancient faction of Greek medical practitioners who called themselves empirics. They were called empirics because they based their treatments on practical experience. Interestingly, another competing school of medical thought of the time, the dogmatics, subscribed to the theory of the four humors, a concept first introduced into medicine by Hippocrates. While the rationalist dogmatics believed that it was necessary to understand the causes of diseases in order to treat those diseases, the empiric physicians emphasized the importance of practical outcomes achieved through experiential trial and error. In other words, Empirics based their treatments on observation and experience, while dogmatics based theirs on theory and logic, which at the time happened to be the theory of the four humors. Now guess what? Here comes the interesting part. It turns out that the empirics were considered the quacks of the medical world.
Why?
Because they favored what their experience taught them over the popular new medical theories of the era. Strange, isn't it? Any reasonable person might ask, well, why couldn't they join forces and embrace both theory and experience? Of course, that makes good sense to me too. The two could be employed synergistically in order to achieve better patient outcomes. Unfortunately, that just didn't happen, and amazingly, it hasn't been the case ever since. The same silly drama has played itself out for centuries. Here we are in the 21st century, stuck at the same impasse with, according to the World Health Organization, the two most popular forms of medicine worldwide, allopathy and homeopathy, at odds with each other for the past 200 years. Both then and now, it's clear that one side is to be faulted for this acrimony. In both cases, the rationalist school of thought accuses the other side of being quackery. Only the terminology has changed. Instead of quackery, modern medicine now refers to homeopathy as pseudoscience. To many, that sounds like a sophisticated word that projects an aura of scientific authority. In reality, it's just a thinly veiled slur used to convey contempt for something that, frankly, Western medicine simply doesn't understand. The homeopaths respond by claiming that they've developed a very effective system of healing based upon 2 centuries of practical experience. Instead of evoking curiosity over something that might be able to provide additional help for its patients, conventional medicine reflexively dismisses homeopathy without further consideration.
Why?
Because homeopathy doesn't make logical sense when judged according to the isms of conventional medicine. In other words, it doesn't conform to medicine's rationally constructed theories regarding the nature of life, the nature of illness, and the best ways to treat it. Now let's return to my original point, which is that modern medicine claims to be both rational and empirical. As I've demonstrated, that simply isn't true. Mainstream medicine long ago turned its back on its empirical roots in favor of an exaggerated form of rationalism. Its allegiance to theory and logic has reached such an extreme that it seems unable to find its way out of its own ideologically constructed prison. Instead, medicine now stakes its life on saving face by continuing to deny a growing onslaught of anomalous empirical data, which only serves to highlight the inconsistencies in many of its theories and makes increasingly clear the high-stakes risks involved in its therapeutic strategies. It's my belief that the isms of science and medicine have little to do with actual science, and are more properly framed as unprovable metaphysical presuppositions. Materialism, reductionism, rationalism, and empiricism are not inherent features of science. They are values imposed upon science by those who, in most cases, fail to acknowledge the unconscious biases that they bring to the scientific enterprise. There's so much more that can be said about these isms, and there are a number of additional isms still worth discussing, but time is limited and I'm saving them for future episodes. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this episode. Don't forget to subscribe, and please tune in again to the next installment of Rethinking Science.